Here's Sven's Aatrox. He's level 2 to Aurelia's level 8 at 9 minutes into the game. This is an unimaginable and somewhat hilarious deficit, especially for Challenger Elo. But that didn't stop Sven from winning this game and making his way to rank 1. Now, of course, he's likely fallen from that rank by now, but the fact that he got there with a near 70% win rate as an ADC is a testament to how insane he is at this game. In this guide, we'll be breaking down exactly how he stomped his lane and carried regardless of this top lane disaster. Let's cover the missions he'll be applying. We'll cover them more in depth as we actually see him apply them. His first mission will be the third wave recall. Secondly, he will use that recall to set up a freeze. And finally, Sven will abuse his own champion's strengths while heavily exploiting the flaws of the enemy team's specific team comp. Okay, let's get into the start of the game. After giving his Nunu a leash, Sven drops a ward in the river as they head into the lane. This is fairly standard, especially in high elo, where junglers very consistently look to cheese gank bottom at level 2. The enemy jungle doesn't follow through with the cheese, but Nunu does, and they manage to burn Thresh's flash. This gank does have unfortunate consequences though. During it, the enemy caster creeps aggro towards them. Then, while Nunu is on his way out, he also consumes one of the caster creeps. We've thoroughly discussed this recently, where you don't want your wave crashing into your opponent too quickly, especially with a melee-ish support like Rakan. Nonetheless, Sven pushes as slowly as he can while zoning the Kog'Maw at the same time. Then, he starts trading his own health very aggressively against both Kog'Maw and Thresh. Sven knows he can do this because he's very likely aware of exactly where the enemy jungler is. Do you know how he knows? Just kidding, you literally can't answer that question. We haven't told you who the enemy jungler is yet. So the enemy jungler is Elise, and we know that she started bot side because of the enemy duo leashing. We know that she didn't cheese gank at level 2 like Nunu. Elise is also notoriously terrible at doing AoE camps early on. For this reason, she almost always goes red to blue to Gromp. Elise is an incredibly popular pick in competitive play, so Sven most definitely knows about her super obvious pathing. That's why he knows that he can play so aggressively at the moment. Moments later, we get confirmation of this pathing as we see her gank Aatrox in top. But let's imagine if it was a different type of jungler. Let's say he was against champions like Rek'Sai, Graves, or Taliyah. They can very easily do red, go to Raptors, then Krugs, and look to gank bottom afterwards. After that gank, they can recall and path to their blue side. Versus junglers that can path this way, he'd have to play much more carefully around this timing. Let's consider power farming junglers such as Karthus, Nocturne, and Zac. They could do the previous route, but those champions are fairly level dependent and are likely to full clear for their initial route. In those cases, you could probably still play fairly aggressively, but maybe not as far forward as Sven was. The point here is that to truly become good at your own role, you have to at least understand the basics of the other roles. Timings are pivotal to your success in this game, and you should at least study a bit on how most junglers path during their first clear. Once the next wave has fully arrived, Sven can turn his attention away from the enemy duo and begins fast shoving as quickly as he can. After doing so, he immediately begins channeling his recall to buy another Doran's Blade. We have to address that this was only possible because he's playing Misfortune. Normally, you cannot do this off of such a weak crash. The enemy duo would be able to crash that wave into your tower before you get back to lane. But Sven obviously knows this game pretty well. Misfortune is the fastest champion in the game at getting back to lane due to her strut. He easily gets back in time before Kog and Thresh could crash the wave. Of course, this third wave recall is applicable on any champion. The concept behind it is that by the third wave, if you CS appropriately, you should have enough gold for another Doran's Blade. Then you crash and look to recall to buy the item. Your opponents can't clear that huge wave that you pushed in and reset the lane, so you'll likely get back in time. Afterwards, you can set up a freeze and eventually force them to take a bad recall timing. As Sven gets back to lane, he starts to clear the wave a bit. You don't want the wave to be too big to where you can't maintain it. As long as the wave is freezing towards you, it usually doesn't matter what size it is. Freezing is especially powerful when you know that one of your opponents doesn't have flash. It sets your jungler up for ganks, and we can see Nunu in the river coming down. They score the kill on Thresh, but Sven does troll with his heal and lets his Nunu die. This was tragic, but the gank was still a positive overall. Now, Kog'Maw is forced to take that bad recall timing that we discussed, and this freeze will deny him a ton of farm and experience. Okay, let's skip ahead just a bit. Rakan is going to recall and roam top. As you climb Elo, your supports will definitely start being more active on the map. Unfortunately for Sven, this does mean that he will be forced to give up his freeze since he can't maintain it in a 1v2 situation. Regardless, Sven will still be able to get an advantage anyway. Whenever a wave crashes into the tower, it'll slow push back into the enemy. Sven is going to do this as slowly as he possibly can. This still denies Kog'Maw a bit of farm since he can't walk up too far and allows him to build a very big wave. Slow pushes like these are also especially powerful when you have a good diving comp. Typically, any melee support with engage will do. Killing your opponent under tower with a huge wave will not only deny them a ton of farm, but then you can get a lot of turret plates due to the big wave that you've crashed. The dive we eventually end up seeing is anything but clean. Coordinating stuff like this in solo queue can definitely be a bit iffy. Nevertheless, they do eventually kill Kog'Maw and deny him a lot of farm and experience once again. We want to address that Nunu has clearly ganked 3 times this game, whereas Elise is nowhere to be seen in bot lane. We don't want people to downplay Sven's good decisions this game just because his Nunu came along. If the first gank hadn't come, Sven would have just done a normal slow push crash and recalled anyways. If the second gank didn't come, he would still gain a massive lead with his freeze by eventually forcing his opponents to take a terrible base timing. And if this final gank didn't come, there's still plenty of options he has off of his slow push. He could recall again and spend the money he had at the time to buy BF swords and boots. Or he could rotate over and take a free dragon while bot lane is stuck clearing the wave. Or he could even look to rotate towards mid and look for a gank. The point is that Sven had plenty of options to pivot towards at all points of the game. His jungler happening to come bottom and making everything look better shouldn't diminish the fact that he was the one setting everything up anyways. Despite winning so hard though, there's still this top lane issue to deal with. It's such a specific situation, but this cannot be ignored. Top lane is bleeding out way too badly. Him and Rakan recall and rotate over there to try and salvage the situation as best they can. Then, once again, Sven uses Misfortune's incredible movement speed to get back to bot lane in time to barely defend his tower versus this Herald push. Okay, so Sven successfully got himself a huge lead in bot, stopped some of the bleeding in top lane, and momentarily saved his tower. But his team is still down nearly 5k gold. Based on this game's state, what do you think Sven should do to come back in this game and win it for his team? If your answer is some variation of stalling the game out, you would be correct. Take a look at both team comps side by side. Sven's team heavily outskilled in literally every role, besides maybe top lane. Not only that, but his team's composition is way easier to execute as well. The enemy team is comprised almost entirely of champions who require a ton of skill expression to function properly. Meanwhile, Sven's team can probably all just press R in the general direction of the enemy team and do just fine. It's important to keep details like these in mind because it means it's much more likely that the enemy team throws by misplaying their champions. Therefore, Sven's goal should be to stall out the game until his team outscales and wait for that pivotal moment when the enemy team does inevitably throw. To that effect, we see him pushing bottom. He's just farming and avoiding fights, trying to stall out the game. But then we see a teleport coming down, and the enemy team rotating towards Dragon and potentially to him. Here's where Sven shows us why he's a league or two above everyone else. Instead of panicking and trying to run away, he moves forward and clears the incoming wave in between the enemy's towers. Because he had decent knowledge of where everyone on the enemy team was, he knew he had enough time to clear most of the wave before executing himself. This was a really solid move that accomplished the macro goals we discussed earlier. Think about it like this. What's the actual point of a kill? Yes, the 300 gold is nice, but the main point of a kill is to deny your opponent a ton of farm and to take objectives while they're dead. But by executing after clearing the wave, he's denied all those advantages from the enemy team. It'll take them a long time to shove out bot lane to the point where Sven actually respawns and goes to watch the wave, having barely missed any CS. This wasn't a huge game swinging play and not a situation that comes up often. It just showcases how in tune Sven is with playing towards his win condition. This kind of strategy continues, and the enemy team isn't able to generate any significant lead within the 6 or so minutes we skipped. When this fight eventually breaks out, it's starting to look like both sides are on even footing due to the scaling advantage Sven's team has. And what do you know, Aurelia tries to do fancy Aurelia stuff and is immediately punished for misplaying and throws her huge lead. Then, Sven and his team eventually chase everyone down and ace them. This leads into a Baron capture. And, well, the scaling team came back. There's nothing the enemy team cup can do to win this game now, so Sven easily ended up with 15 kills this game. Despite having the hardest in-team top laner imaginable, through intelligent early play and by understanding his win condition, Sven managed to overcome the odds and win regardless. Alright guys, that'll wrap this one up. By the way, we released some crazy guides over at SkillCapped which are exclusive only to our subscribers. We have over 700 guides covering everything you need to know to rapidly improve. We also send our challengers into Elo Hell every week to see how they climb out of the most extreme scenarios with the worst teammates imaginable, all wrapped up into courses that you can watch right away. Oh, and if you don't significantly improve while using SkillCapped, you get a full refund. So, what are you waiting for? Sign up today and escape Elo Hell. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.